I thought I saw a man brought to life. He was warm, he came around like he was dignified.
What happened when a 13-year-old singer walked onto the America's Got Talent stage and chose one of Queen's most demanding songs? In January 2020, Angelina Jordan appeared on America's Got Talent, The Champions, and performed Bohemian Rhapsody. The choice immediately created a difficult comparison. Queen's original recording had become one of the most recognizable vocal productions in popular music, while Angelina was still only 13. Yet the performance quickly moved beyond the question of age. Instead of attempting to reproduce Freddie Mercury note for note, Angelina delivered the song through her own vocal identity. Her interpretation was quieter in places, more intimate in others, and strongly influenced by the phrasing and emotional restraint associated with jazz and soul. The result attracted attention not simply because a young singer had selected a legendary song, but because the performance revealed unusual control over several different vocal qualities. A difficult song can impress an audience once. A performance with layers of interpretation gives listeners reasons to return. And that is exactly what happened with Angelina's version. Vocal analysts later examined her technique in detail, while fans continued pointing to the contrast between her powerful passages and her softer delivery. But the bigger question was still waiting. Was the performance impressive because of the notes she could reach, or because of what she did between those notes? The biggest challenge was not simply singing the song, it was surviving everything the song demands from a vocalist. Bohemian Rhapsody is structurally unlike a conventional pop single. The composition moves through contrasting musical sections, beginning with an intimate vocal opening before developing into a piano-led ballad, an elaborate operatic passage, a hard rock section, and a closing coda. That means a singer cannot rely on one vocal approach from beginning to end. The ballad section demands restraint and storytelling. The operatic passage requires precision and rapid changes in vocal texture. The rock section requires dramatically different energy. Then, the song has to resolve without making the final moments feel disconnected from everything that came before. The original Queen recording adds another layer of difficulty. The operatic section was constructed using extensive vocal overdubbing involving Freddie Mercury, Brian May, and Roger Taylor. Sources discussing the recording describe approximately 180 separate vocal overdubs used to create the enormous choir effect. Angelina obviously was not recreating that studio architecture on stage. She was doing something different. She was compressing the emotional journey of an extremely complex recording into her own performance. And that makes the next detail particularly important. If Angelina's performance were converted into a graph, the most interesting part would not necessarily be the highest point. It would be the movement. Think of vocal telemetry as a way of examining the performance through qualities such as pitch, intensity, tone, breath, and timing. There is no evidence that Angelina's America's Got Talent performance was literally recorded through some special vocal telemetry system. In this story, the term works as a metaphor for what happens when the performance is examined closely. And that examination reveals something important. Angelina does not remain at one emotional or vocal level. She changes. A phrase can begin softly, the tone can become fuller, the intensity can increase, then the voice can retreat again. Those changes may be subtle, but they dramatically affect how the listener experiences the song. Vocal analysis content focusing specifically on Angelina's performance has examined her technique, while longtime observers have emphasized how quickly she can move between powerful and sensitive vocal qualities. That variation is important because the human ear responds strongly to contrast. If everything is loud, loudness stops being surprising. If everything is emotional, emotion becomes predictable. Angelina's approach creates space. She allows the listener to notice the difference between one phrase and the next. And that brings the analysis to a quality that may be even more important than vocal range. One of the most revealing details is that Angelina often sounds strongest when she is not trying to sound powerful. The instinctive assumption about a song like Bohemian Rhapsody is that the biggest vocal moments should dominate. But Angelina's performance demonstrates another approach. She creates impact through restraint. Her softer passages provide a reference point for the moments when the voice becomes fuller and more forceful. That contrast gives the larger moments additional weight. Professional vocal performance depends heavily on dynamics and tone, not simply pitch range. Analysis of Freddie Mercury's own recording style has similarly emphasized the importance of dynamic and timbral control, rather than treating range as the only measure of vocal ability. That distinction helps explain why Angelina's performance continues to attract technical analysis. Listeners can hear the obvious moments, but trained listeners may also notice what happens immediately before those moments: the preparation, the breath, the reduction in intensity, the change in tone, then the release. It is almost like watching an athlete conserve energy before a decisive movement. The audience may not consciously calculate any of it, but they feel the effect. And when the performance returns to a quieter space, the listener has another contrast to absorb. That cycle is one reason the performance avoids feeling completely predictable. But there is another element that makes Angelina's sound especially recognizable. Sometimes the sound that makes a singer recognizable is not the biggest sound. It is the texture between the notes. Angelina's voice has often been described by listeners in terms of warmth, softness, and a breathy quality. That breathiness can change the emotional distance between singer and audience. A completely powerful vocal can feel enormous. A softer, airier vocal can feel much closer. That difference becomes particularly useful in a song containing such extreme musical contrasts. Commentary from Angelina-focused discussions has highlighted the amount of breathiness in her performance and connected it with the broader range of skills demonstrated in the song. Importantly, this should not be interpreted as proof that every breathy sound is technically superior. It is about artistic effect. The texture helps create a particular emotional identity, and that identity separates Angelina's version from a straightforward imitation of Queen. She does not need to sound like Freddie Mercury. She needs to communicate the song through the characteristics of her own instrument. That is a much more interesting artistic challenge. The performance, therefore, becomes less about asking whether she can duplicate the original and more about asking what she can add to it. The answer becomes increasingly clear as the song develops. She adds intimacy, she adds restraint, and she adds a vocal personality that makes the arrangement feel different without destroying its identity. The biggest difference between copying a legendary performance and creating your own version is what happens when the original disappears from your mind. Angelina's performance works because she does not appear to treat Bohemian Rhapsody as a museum piece. She interprets it. That distinction is important. A cover can follow the original arrangement, phrasing, and vocal character as closely as possible. An interpretation takes the same material and filters it through a different artistic identity. Angelina's approach leaned toward the latter. Her phrasing was more intimate, her tone carried a different character, and her quieter moments created a different emotional atmosphere from the larger theatrical sound associated with Queen's recording. That does not make one version better than the other. They are solving different artistic problems. Queen created an enormous studio production that relied heavily on layered vocals and dramatic changes in style. Angelina created a performance centered around a single young vocalist and the emotional contrast inside the song. That difference is precisely what made the performance worth discussing. The audience was not simply hearing another reproduction of a famous recording. They were hearing a reinterpretation. And the fact that vocal coaches later analyzed the performance shows that there was more happening than a simple viral moment. But the story becomes even more interesting when we look at what happened after the original broadcast. Viral performances usually peak quickly. Angelina's Bohemian Rhapsody did something different. People kept finding new reasons to analyze it. One explanation is variation. The performance does not deliver exactly the same vocal sensation from beginning to end. Observers have pointed to the rapid changes between powerful and sensitive passages, sometimes occurring within only a few seconds. That creates replay value. A first-time listener may focus on the overall emotional impact. A second listener may notice a particular phrase. A third may begin paying attention to her breathing, tone, or dynamics. Then someone else approaches the performance from a technical perspective. That is how a performance can continue generating discussion long after the original broadcast. It becomes more than a single viewing experience. It becomes something people can dissect. Vocal analysis creators have specifically examined Angelina's technique and the physical mechanics behind her singing. But there is also an emotional component. Technical analysis can explain what happens. It cannot completely explain why listeners feel something. That is where interpretation becomes important. Angelina's performance balances technique with emotional restraint. She does not need exaggerated movement to communicate intensity. She can allow the voice itself to carry the message. And that may explain why the performance remained relevant as Angelina grew older, because the performance was never only about being 13. It was about what she could already communicate at 13. The remarkable part was that Angelina's age created the headline, but her technique gave the story a longer life. When Angelina performed Bohemian Rhapsody on America's Got Talent, The Champions, she was 13. That fact naturally became part of the public reaction. A teenager taking on a song associated with one of rock music's most celebrated vocalists is an obvious attention grabber. But age alone cannot explain why the performance continues to attract analysis. Eventually, the novelty disappears. The singer gets older. The original broadcast becomes historical footage. What remains is the performance itself. That is exactly why the technical details matter. If listeners returned only because of the age of the performer, the interest should eventually decline. Instead, people continue discussing her phrasing, dynamics, tone, breathiness, and interpretation. The performance has effectively become a reference point in Angelina Jordan's career. And her later development makes that reference point even more interesting. In January 2026, Angelina performed Bohemian Rhapsody again during a Las Vegas concert, according to records documenting her setlist. That creates an unusual comparison. The audience can now look back at the 13-year-old performer and compare that interpretation with Angelina as a young adult. The song, therefore, becomes a kind of timeline. Same composition, different stage of life, different perspective. And that raises a much bigger question. What exactly has changed? When an artist returns to the same song years later, the performance can reveal something that a new song cannot. A new song tells us where an artist is going. An old song tells us how far the artist has traveled. Angelina's continued relationship with Bohemian Rhapsody creates that opportunity. Her 2026 performance means the song is no longer just associated with her teenage breakthrough. It can now be viewed as part of a longer musical journey. Records from her January 2026 Las Vegas concert list Bohemian Rhapsody among the songs she performed. That does not automatically mean the newer performance is better. It means the comparison becomes more meaningful. The original performance showed a young singer with remarkable command of contrast and interpretation. The later performance comes from an artist with additional years of experience. That difference gives viewers another way to understand the original. What seemed effortless at 13 can look even more impressive when viewed through the perspective of artistic development. And this is where the telemetry idea reaches its most useful point. Instead of measuring only pitch, imagine measuring evolution. How does the tone change? How does the phrasing mature? How does the singer decide where to hold back? How does the emotional interpretation develop? Those questions are more revealing than simply asking how many notes she can sing. Because great vocal performance is not just about range. It is about decisions. And Angelina's decisions are what make the performance worth revisiting. After all the analysis, the biggest surprise is that Angelina Jordan's Bohemian Rhapsody may have very little to do with how high she can sing. The performance's lasting impact comes from control. Pitch matters, tone matters, breath matters, dynamics matter. But none of those elements exists independently. They work together. Angelina can make a phrase smaller so that the next phrase feels larger. She can change the texture of her voice without changing the identity of the song. She can allow a moment to breathe instead of filling every second with maximum power. And she can interpret a legendary composition without simply becoming an imitation of the singer who made it famous. That is why describing the performance only in terms of vocal range misses the bigger story. Even analysis of Freddie Mercury's own voice has emphasized that expressive control over dynamics and timbre can be more important than range alone. Angelina's performance demonstrates a similar principle from a completely different artistic perspective. The most memorable moment may not be the highest note. It may be the moment immediately before it. The pause, the softer tone, the breath, the restraint, then the release. That is the hidden pattern behind the performance. So the phrase vocal telemetry should not be understood as some secret machine that discovered an impossible statistic about Angelina Jordan. It is better understood as a way of looking beneath the surface. If we could visualize every change in pitch, intensity, tone, and breath, the performance would probably look less like a straight line and more like a constantly moving landscape. And perhaps that is why people continue to return to it. Not because they have forgotten what happened, but because every replay gives them another detail to notice. In the end, Angelina Jordan did not need to defeat Bohemian Rhapsody. She simply needed to make the song believable through her own voice. And that may be the most remarkable measurement of all.